In this video article, we're going to look at 7 writing lessons from Stephen King's book on writing. Before we get started, if you want to get an email with a time-stamped overview every time I release a new video, head over to my website, deliberate-practice.com, sign up for the email list there. Shortly, there will be the director's cut version of a series of teaching articles I'm going to create with the topic of how to write your first short story. And what I'll do is when I've finished, I'll edit them all together into one long video. That will be here on YouTube. It will be 2.5–3 hours long. But if you're on the email list, you'll have access to the director's cut version where each segment will have its own page with its own video on it, plus timestamp notes and maybe implementation guides as necessary. So head over and go and do that, and let's get started. So the hardest job, I've said it before in numerous of my videos, hardest job for writers is to find their own writing process. Now Steve's book on writing distills some of his thoughts on this, and I'll go over 7 lessons from it. A caveat: I don't think On Writing is Stephen King's best book about writing. I don't think it's even his second best. So it's still an enjoyable book. Some of the memoir sections are really interesting. At the end, I'll suggest another book that you've probably not read, which is a great example of how to write something in the non-fiction space in a colloquial voice. That's for the end. But so the 2 books that I think are better are his book on his overview of the horror and kind of science fiction and fantasy field, Danse Macabre. There's loads of interesting pieces of writing advice hidden away in there. I think that's where we first got the concept of the boys in the basement. Also, he talks about books that he loved, and through his recommendations I was introduced to writers like Ray Bradbury, for which I'll be eternally grateful. Richard Matheson. I read The Haunting of Hill House as a result of this book, and there were a few others. But Harlan Ellison was the other guy who I found because of this book, who I might not have found otherwise. So I think Danse Macabre is the best book he's written on writing. The second best is his novel Misery, and I'll leave that to you to go and read. A great novel, and to find all the little bits and pieces of writing advice that are hidden away in the plot of Misery. So that will be an enjoyable read for you if you've never read the book, because it's a great psychological thriller. Okay, the first lesson: read a lot, write a lot. I'm sure you've heard this before. He says writers need to do 2 things: read a lot and write a lot. Steve reads 70 to 80 books a year. That's kind of like 1.5 books a week. And he writes 2,000 words every day. Now, Steve is Steve and you are you. Those numbers you can adjust to suit your unique combination of life circumstances. So for example, for me, for reading, I tend to read more in the winter than the summer, and in the winter I tend to go to bed around 9:30 and read for 2.5 hours, so I get through a truckload in the winter. In the summer I read much less. In terms of writing fiction at the moment, I'm between 250 and 500 words a day. I do want to ramp that up. You can adjust the numbers to suit yourself, and those numbers don't need to be permanently etched in stone, so you can change them. You can write more as you make more time, or you can read more if you make more time. Also, the main thing is to focus on consistency, so be reading regularly and writing regularly. So if you are writing even 250 words a day, that will get you to writing a novel by the end of the year. And 250 words a day, 5 or 10 minutes of your time, everyone can do that. If you don't want to do that, then perhaps you don't want to be a writer. You want to be someone who has written, which is a subject for another video. Second lesson: kill your darlings. Every piece of writing in a story should serve the story and not your ego. So if a piece of writing, a line of writing, a great phrase, a great piece of description, a great piece of dialogue doesn't serve the story, then the delete key is your friend and you can get rid of it. Steve's rule of thumb: second draft should be the first draft minus 10%. Again, you will have your own unique writing process, so those numbers might be off. So your second draft might be the first draft minus 30%, or it might be the first draft minus 1%. You've got to find your process, and when you find your process, you'll be able to come up with your numbers that do that. The principle, though, holds. The first draft should have material in it that you can trim, that you can make less wordy or less verbose, and we'll come on to. So, for example, we'll come on to adverbs in the next slide. But if you replace a weak verb qualified by an adverb with a strong verb, you've used one word to do the work of two and created a more concise and vivid image for your reader. So those kind of line by line tricks of the trade can really help with your editing, but do the story first. When you do your editing, edit for story, and only when you've got the story lined up do you then edit for anything else. That's my view of the revision process anyway. Lesson 3, write with the door closed, but edit with the door open. What this means is, for the first draft, write for you. And Steve uses a metaphor of his stories are like fossils in the deep part of his brain that he has to excavate, and that first draft is just for you, and then the second draft and onwards, clean it up in order you can display the fossil. So that's what he means by edit with the door open, write with the door closed for you, edit with the door open, which means maybe if you've got beta readers or alpha readers, any of those things, when you're in a position where you can start getting that feedback, that's second draft and onwards. Lesson 4, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Steve talks about the writer's toolbox and the different levels of items you should have. My spell check has respelled adverbs as adverts there. Keynote has this weird spell check and I didn't see it when I was creating the slides. So he doesn't hate adverts, although he probably does, because I do. He hates adverbs. He says strong verbs don't need crutches of words that end in ly. Plus, when you use adverbs, they tend to tell and not show. So like, he said angrily can be rephrased with a stronger verb. He shouted, for example. And so using adverbs tends to make it weakens your prose, not just because you've got two words where one will do the work and do the work more vividly, but it tends to make you write in a less active way, which is another thing he doesn't like, which is passive voice. So try and make your writing lean and clean. George Orwell wrote an essay on writing and politics, and in that essay he said that for your writing you should aspire to write so that your writing is like a clear window and the reader can see the ideas that you're trying to display to them without seeing the ways that you're presenting those ideas. Now, obviously, if you're writing in some kind of poetic style, some fantasy like Patricia McKillip, Forgotten Beasts of Elds, has a wonderful prose style. But if you're not aiming to write that style, and you're aiming, if you like thrillers, stuff like that, they perhaps don't need to be so poetic and a lean and clean style. Getting out of the way of the reader and the story, coming between them as little as possible, is for most writers something to aspire to. Lesson 5, live in the details. Specific details in your story creates truth for the reader. Small but honest observations create authenticity. Now, even people who don't like Stephen King say that one of the things that he's great at is portraying small town America, especially a small town America that no longer exists. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was younger. I kind of fell out of love with his writing around early 1990s. I've subsequently found out that books like The Tommyknockers was another one around that time. I've forgotten which one it was. It was one where there was an author and he had some kind of alter ego, and they were one was trying to kill the other. Forget what that one was called, but those two books, I stopped reading him after that because, and I found out afterwards that those were periods of his life where he was struggling with substance issues, let's just euphemistically say. But I said already that I read a lot in the winter. Last winter I read at least 30 books that were 800 to 1500 pages long. One of them was Steve's book about the assassination of Kennedy, and and it's something like 11-10-63 or 10-11-63, one of those titles. In the US, you rotate the days and the month compared to how we write dates and month in the UK, so I never remember which way round it is. But that book is about a guy who gets to go back in time and to try and stop the assassination of Kennedy, and he goes and lives, but where he goes back through the time portal takes him back to 1959 or 1960. So he's got to live for 2 or 3 years before the assassination takes place. And that section of the book is really cool with all the authentic details. If you want to read someone portraying another era in a way that makes you believe it, the middle chunk of that book is fantastic for that. And it's actually a really good book. As I say, I fell out of love with Stephen King. I tried to read Doctor Sleep because I love The Shining. Didn't like Doctor Sleep. Loved The Talisman that he wrote with Peter Straub. Didn't like The Black House. But 11-10-63 or 10-11-63, whichever way around it is, and I've probably got the dates wrong, is a great book, and you'll be able to see how Steve uses character details, dress of character details, houses, cars, how he uses all that thing to create a rich and authentic environment. It's almost a lesson in world building for people who aren't fantasy and science fiction writers, because even if you write a story set now, you still need to build your world, and Steve does it. He is fantastic at that, one of the best. So definitely worth checking things like that out, and providing all those details and the observations helps the reader experience the story more deeply. And as writers, that's what we want from our readers. And Steve says, before you start describing something, you need to visualize it first, and so you see the details in your head before you actually put them on the page. Lesson 6: write for yourself, not the market. Writing for money is hack work. Those aren't Steve's words, they're my words. If you the other thing about writing for money is, if you see, so for example, at the moment we are, let me tell you the date, I'm rubbish with dates, as you've already told or already figured out from Steve's book and getting the date of Kennedy's assassination wrong, probably. Today is the 4th of November 2025, and at the moment one of the biggest trends, especially in fantasy and science fiction, is called romantasy, which is, if you don't know what it is, it's kind of like a cross between 50 Shades of Grey and a Game of Thrones, to give you a quick metaphor that tells you what it's all about. The way traditional publishing works is that if you look at that and go, oh, that's really selling well, I'm going to write some of that and see if I can get some of that money. The way traditional publishing works, let's say you write fast and you can write one of those, and they're like 700-800 page novels, let's say, which is maybe 200,000 words. Let's say you can crack that out in 3 months and send it off to a publisher. Even if the publisher accepts it immediately, you're probably not going to see it in print for 18 months, and there's a possibility that in 18 months' time that trend for those kind of stories to be very popular has already bitten the dust. If it hasn't, it won't be long after that. So this is the problem with writing for money, is assessing the market and assessing what's going to be released and what's going to be popular in 18 months time, 2 years time, or if you're self-published, maybe 6 months time, is really hard. William Goldman, the screenwriter, one of my favorite authors, both fiction and non-fiction, his famous quote, "Nobody knows anything," he was referring to Hollywood. It's the same in book publishing. They've got no idea what's going to work, what's going to sell well. So when 50 Shades of Grey came out and sold, I think I read somewhere it sold 150 million copies. Good luck to the author. I've got no idea how it sold that many copies, but it spawned a subgenre of knockoffs which were called billionaire romance novels. But those novels are no longer very popular, and as far as I'm aware, there are not many new ones in that genre or subgenre being done. So if you're writing for money, I personally think if you're doing something for money, there are things that are more lucrative than writing fiction, unless you hit the big time. And hitting the big time is like winning the lottery. So I think you're better off investing your time somewhere else. But when you write about what you love, writing isn't work, it's play. And your enthusiasm is contagious for the reader. And you're unlikely to write something that endures if you've got your eye on the market. And I would much rather try and write something that I love, and if only 100 people read it, but 10 of those love it, well, that's a win for me, and I'll take that every day of the week, and I couldn't care less if it doesn't make money. You may have a different attitude, so take this with a pinch of salt, put your attitude on this and see how you feel about that kind of thing. Final lesson: writing is the cheapest therapy on the market. I don't think Steve couched it in precisely those terms, but the writing itself should be enjoyable, even if you don't really give it to many people to read. It's also a great way to keep you happy and sane. If you've ever written in flow, started writing and suddenly it's gone, so that Steve has a great metaphor for it in Misery. One of the lessons you can find if you read Misery is he calls it going through the hole in the paper. If you start writing something and you go through the hole in the paper, you come back 2 hours later and you look at the time and go, what the fuck just happened? I've just lost 2 hours, and you've got 1,500 words in your word processor document. You don't know what happened, time's gone, and you get an enormous endorphin rush and a dopamine hit. It's an incredible experience. If you've never experienced that, then work on learning how to write in flow, and you will. This is why I write, because when that happens, it doesn't happen every writing day, but when it happens, it's absolutely great. And then if you write something, you put it out there, readers read it and they respond to it, you get the chance with your writing to enrich their lives too, not just yours. And that's a win-win. So if you've ever had an email or a letter thanking you for a book, those are just priceless. They're great to receive. I've only got one piece of fiction that's out on Amazon at this point in time. That's under a pen name, which is under my hat, as it were. I don't have a real hat on, it's a metaphorical hat. But I've sold 50 or 60 copies of that, mostly to people who I know, and of those people who've read it, several of them always ask when's the next one coming out, and even when I see them, they go, are you ever going to write the next one of this one? So that was cool. But if you followed me on the channel for any length of time, you know I write music books too, and some of the reviews I see on Amazon, some of the emails I get from people, they're just incredible. When you get one where the reader has really got it, they've taken your book, they've learnt from it, they've taken it to their playing, and become a better player, and then they're writing to you saying thank you so much for writing that book. I would give books away for people who, if I knew everyone who read one of these books would get that result, and which requires them to actually do the work, I would just give them away at cost, because getting those emails is one of the best things. When it happens, and it happens a couple of times a month, maybe more, it makes a shitty day a good day, and it makes a good day a great day. So closing out, not everything in on writing will work for you, and I do disagree with Steve on some things, but I don't like doing negative things, so I've not really mentioned them here. The main one is on his he stresses that you should write with discovery and not do any outlining. I disagree with that in many ways, but I've got one piece of fiction on Amazon that sold 60 copies. He's got 70 or 80 which has sold hundreds of millions, so you can do the math on that and say, well, Steve probably knows what he's talking about and you don't. So, and I couldn't argue with those maths. Anyway, but depending on where you are as a writer in your writing journey, even picking up one or two ideas from this book makes it worthwhile to have in your bookshelf. Now I'm chronicling various things that I'm doing and putting to sorry, before I go on to that, also Steve wrote a book called Guns. It's a short book. I imagine it's 20,000 words, so it's novella length, but it's non-fiction, and he wrote it after a school shooting in the US, and I put it there in brackets to make sure I didn't forget it, which I nearly did, having promised to talk to you about it at the start of the video. And Guns is a great example of writing colloquially but authentically with a non-fiction topic. It's a great read, whatever. If you're in the US, whichever side of the gun debate you fall on, don't read it for that, because you'll either agree or disagree with Steve's premise, but read it to see how he gets the effect that he does, because it's a great piece of non-fiction writing. I wish more non-fiction writers would write like this rather than the terrible self-help style that you see in 99 out of every 100 books on Amazon. Anyway, I'm putting together a resource for aspiring and beginning writers. It's called The Writing Vault. You find it at that URL in front of you. I'll put a link in the description too, so you can go check it out. So do go and check that out, see if it might be a fit. If you've got any questions, paul@deliberate-practice.com is where you can grab me. And thank you for your time today, and I'll leave you on this screen with some recommended videos from my channel.